how they engineered Black hate to steer Black people away from fighting whites by focusing on fighting each other. Check out this clip.
Hey, I was a conscript in the South African Army in 1988 and 89. Used to have to do 2 years. 1989 was the last year of having to do 2 years of compulsory military service as Nelson Mandela was led out of jail and we moved towards the first free and fair elections in South Africa. But I was based up in northern Zululand near a town called Matubatuba in 121 Battalion, which was a Zulu battalion with a small cadre of white officers, but all the troops and a lot of the non-commissioned officers were Zulus. And one of the things that was going on in my area, because I was the law officer covering a very large area of northern Zululand up to the Swaziland-Mozambique border, was a small group of recce officers. That was like our equivalent of the SAS, Navy SEALs type soldiers, training local Zulu men to go up to the townships and the mine hostels around Johannesburg and in the Transvaal to deliberately foment racial tension and violence with other tribes based in those hostels and townships. And this was a very deliberate strategy of the South African government and the South African military at the time to create black-on-black violence, to detract from the potential for black-on-white violence, which in those days was very low because we had a very strong and violent police force repressing that side of things. But there was this massive deflection that went on right up until I left the army at the end of 1989. And a lot of white people don't know that, is that there was a very deliberate strategy, because what white people in South Africa at the time, and no doubt for some period afterwards, were often saying is, you know, these blacks can't run a country because they're always fighting each other. These tribes hate each other, right? The Zulus hate the Xhosas, who hate the Ndebele, who hate this guys, the Pondos, and this kept saying that basically that blacks were too violent to run a country. And what most people have no idea of is that violence, that intertribal violence, was fomented by the white South African government, army and police force very deliberately. So we need to revise our idea of history, not just the recent history, the pre-apartheid history of South Africa, but the entire history of European and white domination of Africa and the way that that was presented to us.
Okay, I hear what he's saying, but tribalism existed long before the Dutch and British settlers came to South Africa. So to assume that blacks are so gullible to turn on each other based on actions of some races, does this absolve blacks of the wrongs they committed along tribal lines? Shaka waged war to a lot of territories, but for the greater good, to unite and form the great Zulu nation we see today. But the apartheid government weaponized ethnic and tribal identities to weaken black political powers. This wasn't accidental. It was an official strategy rooted in the belief that a divided black population would never mount a unified resistance. That's the difference between the context of tribal wars. Now, let's be very clear. The apartheid state didn't just rely on guns, prisons, and racist laws. They relied on division, especially amongst Black South Africans. From the 1950s onwards, the regime pushed a policy called separate development. Every Black person was forcibly assigned a tribal identity: Xhosa, Zulu, Pedi, Tswana, Sotho, Venda, whether they agreed or not. This is how Bantusm or homelands were created, and that wasn't cultural respect. It was political engineering. Why? Because a united Black nation would have been unstoppable. So the state broke everyone into smaller, isolated groups with different leaders, different territories, and different citizenships. It wasn't diversity. it was division. The government didn't stop there. They went further by installing compliant tribal chiefs and homeland presidents who depended on apartheid funding. These leaders were rewarded if they resisted the ANC or PAC and punished if they didn't fall in line. And then came the most violent part of it all. In the late 80s and early 90s, the apartheid security forces armed, funded, and protected rival factions, especially in KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Gauteng. This sparked what the world portrayed as Zulu versus Xhosa tribal violence. But the truth is, it was a political warfare engineered by a government trying to stop the liberation movement. This is why you will still hear people today using tribal language to discredit each other. It's a legacy of apartheid manipulation, not natural African division. And that is where tribalism comes from. And I totally understand why Black Americans hate tribalism, because it is not a natural African and it's not a natural African tradition. Do you understand? It is not something that the African people, or a concept that the African people came up with and lived according to. It's not an African thing. Tribes are not an African religion. Yes, an African religion. It's not an African brand. It's not an African lifestyle. It's not an African culture. Tribalism came with the white settlers to divide Black people, to put us in little territories that when they start losing power, they can use those territories to fight each other instead of realizing that they have a common enemy, the white man. So I totally understand now, actually, after doing this research, because part of the origin of homelands that I was reading here right now, I got it from a book called Divide, Conquer, but Not Unify. I forgot the author of this book. So I just took that little snippet and basically just to tell you the background on how homelands and tribes were formulated to work for the apartheid government. And they put in compliant chiefs and presidents of those little homelands and tribes, and made sure that those chiefs relied on apartheid funding. And if they did not, they will face the brutal, or they'll face the brutal forces of the apartheid regime, the apartheid soldiers, the apartheid laws. Do you understand? So now I totally understand when Mr. Scott or any Black Americans say, guys, we are divided, and tribalism plays a huge role in dividing Africa, the motherland. We are not comfortable in coming back home because y'all are so divided. And that is not an African construct, by the way. That is not our legacy. That is not our history. That is not our culture. That is not our lifestyle. It's one thing that they use to mislead us into thinking that we cannot be united. And, you know, a united Black nation is so strong and powerful, they fear that. So they created these little homelands. I totally understand Black Americans now. At first, I was a bit apprehensive when Black Americans started mocking the cultures, not mocking, but pointing out that culture and tribes are the reason why Africa is not united, are the reason why Black Africans will remain in captivity under the colonizers. You know, they'll remain in the culture of neocolonialism because of these tribes. I didn't understand it, especially during that Mardi Gras festival that was happening in New Orleans in America, where there was Zulu American. Can you pull that picture or footage up?
South Africans are furious about this. There have been several videos going viral of a Zulu parade in New Orleans in the United States. And what's made so many people angry is how they are dressed and how what they are wearing looks nothing like traditional Zulu attire. The Americans who support the Zulu parade say this is a tradition they have been doing in New Orleans for decades and that South Africans are misinterpreting it. Americans have defended this parade by saying it actually has nothing to do with the real Zulu tribe in South Africa. They say it's just a name. However, on the side of the bus, it literally says African Zulu. Also, if you go onto their official website, there are many references to the actual Zulu tribe in South Africa. For example, one of their characters is known as a Zulu witch doctor. A witch doctor is a South African name and a South African term. It literally says here on the site, in Zulu's ancestral land of Africa, the witch doctor is referred to as a sorcerer, prophet, or healer. So it seems this group does link itself to the actual Zulu tribe. So do you you think this is offensive to the Zulu culture? Let me know what you think in the comments.
Yeah, that is where South Africans lost it after seeing this video. Like, what is a Zulu African, you know? And Black people, Black Americans, they don't even think about that. They see a tradition and a culture that they like and they like to celebrate. It was in a way to pay homage to us. It wasn't done in the proper manner that I would have liked. I would have liked a little bit of research, but I strongly believe that Black Americans did not have malicious intent when they celebrated the African Zulu culture during Mardi Gras celebration in New Orleans. I don't think they had bad intentions. It's just that, you know, we are very precious when it comes to our cultural dynamics here in Africa. But now I understand that these cultural dynamics, these homelands, these little bits of tribes are the reason why we remain divided and easy to conquer. It does make sense. I didn't understand where Black Americans were coming from, but now I see the point. So to think that, you know, the white supremacists, not even the apartheid government, but to think that the white supremacists around the globe created and manufactured tribalism to divide the diaspora, it's really mind-blowing. After reading this book, I started understanding Black Americans more and the need to unite the diaspora. I start understanding. I see why actually white Americans, especially the Trump administration, is so apprehensive when it comes to dealing with Black Americans, because they know that Black Americans understand the need for the diaspora to be united. They understand the greater power of Black people that a lot of the African people right here on the continent don't understand. I hope I made sense. What do you think about this segment? Comment to us in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and share the broadcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss these groundbreaking conversations right here on the African Diaspora News channel. And all family, you know that I have my own YouTube channel. It's called The Native Talk. The link is in the description box below. So do go to the description box below. Click on the link. We talk everything African diaspora, the cultural landscape that form this beautiful continent of mine, and your favorite South African destination that you'd like to travel to with me as your tour guide. But until then, have a good one.